He cost $1. That was what the sign said on the rusted kennel door. Wounded K9, AS is. Caleb Walker, a white former U.S. Marine with a scar across his jaw and ghosts behind his eyes, should have kept walking. But the German shepherd lifted his head, one torn ear twitching, amber eyes locked on Caleb like he still remembered what loyalty meant. "I'll take him," Caleb said. By midnight, that broken dog was bleeding through his bandage, dragging himself across the farmhouse floor, clawing at Caleb's bedroom door like death itself was behind it. Caleb woke to the sound. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Atlas. The dog didn't bark. He grabbed Caleb's dog tags in his teeth and pulled. Downstairs, beneath the old floorboards, something was burning. A thin ribbon of smoke curled from the basement door. Caleb reached for the knob, but Atlas lunged past him, limping into the dark. Then Caleb heard it. Not fire. Not wood cracking. A cry. Small. Alive. Coming from somewhere under the house. Caleb froze as Atlas disappeared into the smoke, and the last thing he saw was his father's old Marine trunk bursting open in the flames. He was worth $1 to the man who wanted him gone. But before sunrise, that wounded dog would become the reason a Marine lived long enough to remember why God had spared him. The rain had started just after dusk, soft at first, then harder, tapping against the windows of the old farmhouse like impatient fingers. Outside Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, the fields lay black and empty under a low November sky, and the wind moved through the dead grass with a sound almost like whispering. Caleb Walker sat alone at the kitchen table, one hand wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold, the other resting near the silver dog tags that hung against his chest. He was 37, a former U.S. Marine, tall and broad-shouldered, with close-cropped brown hair, pale skin weathered by years of sun and service, and blue-gray eyes that looked calm only because they had learned to hide the storm. A thin scar crossed the edge of his jaw, not dramatic enough for strangers to ask about, but deep enough for Caleb to feel it tighten whenever the past came too close. The house around him had belonged to his father, also a Marine, also a man who kept pain locked behind silence. Since his father's passing, the place had become less a home than a storage box for memories Caleb was not ready to touch. The upstairs rooms smelled of cedar and dust. The hallway walls still held faded photographs of men in uniform, field jackets, quiet smiles, dogs sitting proudly at their sides. In the basement, behind a door Caleb rarely opened, were his father's old trunks, his K9 gear, training leads, worn leather gloves, and things Caleb had promised himself he would sort through someday. Someday had become months, then years, and the basement stayed locked. But that night, something in the house had changed. It began with the dog. Atlas lay on an old wool blanket near the back door, where Caleb had placed him only hours earlier. The German shepherd had not moved much since coming home. He was 6 years old, maybe older, lean beneath his sable coat, with a dark saddle along his back and hints of ash gray around his muzzle. One ear stood tall, the other bent slightly at the torn edge. His right hind leg was wrapped in clean white bandage from paw to hip, and every breath he took seemed careful, as if even breathing required permission. Caleb had found him behind a private K9 training facility going out of business, a place with cracked concrete runs, peeling paint, and the bitter smell of wet straw and bleach. There had been a sign taped to the kennel door in thick black marker. Wounded K9, $1. As is. The owner had laughed when Caleb stopped in front of the cage. Said the dog was no good anymore. Said he had too many bad memories, too much fear, too little use. Caleb had stared at the animal through the metal bars, and Atlas had stared back. Not begging, not trusting, just watching. The way a soldier watches a road that has already taken something from him. Caleb did not argue with the man. He did not lecture him. He simply took a folded dollar from his wallet, placed it on the counter, and said, "I'll take him." Now Atlas was here, in this lonely farmhouse, refusing food, refusing comfort, refusing everything except the corner of the kitchen, where he could see both doors at once. Caleb understood that. Some creatures did not sleep unless they knew where the exits were. He rose slowly, careful not to startle him, and crossed the kitchen with a small bowl of water. Atlas's amber eyes followed every step. "Easy, boy," Caleb murmured. "No one's asking anything from you tonight." The dog's ears twitched at the sound of his voice, but he did not lift his head. Caleb set the bowl down a few feet away, then backed up and sat on the floor instead of the chair. Rain rolled down the glass behind him. The old refrigerator hummed. Somewhere in the walls, pipes clicked as the heat came on. Caleb looked at the dog and saw more than a wounded animal. He saw the kind of silence that comes after too many commands, too many disappointments, too many hands that reached without kindness. "They told me I was broken too," Caleb said quietly, almost ashamed of hearing the words leave his mouth. Atlas blinked once. Caleb gave a tired half-smile. "Guess that makes two of us." The dog did not come closer. But after a long while, when the wind pressed hard against the windows and the farmhouse creaked around them, Atlas stretched his neck toward the bowl and drank. Just 3 small laps. Nothing more. Yet Caleb felt something loosen in his chest. Not joy, not hope exactly. Something smaller. The first match struck in a dark room. He stayed there until his back ached and his coffee had turned bitter. Then he checked Atlas's bandage one last time, placed another blanket within reach, and walked upstairs to the bedroom. He had not changed since moving back into the house. The room was plain. A wooden dresser, a narrow bed, a folded flag in a glass case on the shelf. His father's photograph on the nightstand, taken decades earlier beside a proud German shepherd named Ranger. Caleb paused in front of it longer than he meant to. His father had believed dogs understood the parts of men that men could not explain. Caleb used to believe that too, before the world became louder than faith. He switched off the lamp. Darkness settled gently over the room. For the first time in weeks, exhaustion took him quickly. But sometime after midnight, Caleb opened his eyes to a sound that did not belong to the storm. Scratch, scratch, scratch. At first he thought it was a branch against the siding. Then it came again, closer, sharper, patient but urgent. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Caleb sat up. The hallway beyond his door was black. His heartbeat found an old rhythm, the kind that came before danger had a name. "Atlas," he called softly. No answer. Only the scrape of claws against wood. Caleb swung his feet to the floor and opened the bedroom door. Atlas stood in the hallway under the dim glow of the stairwell night light, his body trembling, his wounded leg held slightly off the floor. The bandage had slipped at the edge. His eyes were fixed on Caleb with an intensity that made the room feel suddenly too small. "What is it, boy?" Caleb whispered. Atlas stepped forward, took Caleb's hanging dog tags gently between his teeth, and tugged. Not hard, just enough. Then he turned and limped toward the stairs. Caleb followed, still half caught between sleep and instinct. The house was dark below, but not silent. There was a faint sound beneath the rain, a soft crackle, a low electric hiss. At the bottom of the stairs, Atlas stopped and faced the basement door. His back stiffened. A thin ribbon of gray smoke curled from the gap near the floor, barely visible in the dark, carrying the bitter scent of old wiring and scorched wood. Caleb's breath caught. "No," he whispered. He reached for the door handle, but Atlas moved first. The wounded German shepherd pushed past him, nose low, body tense, and struck the basement door with his shoulder. Once, twice. Caleb grabbed the knob, feeling heat bloom through the metal. Behind that door, something shifted in the darkness. Then, from below the floorboards, came a sound Caleb would remember for the rest of his life. Not the crackle of fire, not the groan of old wood. A cry. Small, weak, alive. Atlas looked back at him, amber eyes shining like lanterns in the smoke, and in that single breath Caleb understood. The dog had not been trying to save himself. He had been trying to lead Caleb to whatever was trapped beneath the house. Caleb did not open the basement door at first. Training held him still for one hard second, the old Marine instinct rising through the fog of sleep. Smoke meant air. Heat meant distance. Panic meant mistakes. He pulled the sleeve of his shirt over his hand and touched the knob again. Warm, but not burning. Somewhere beneath them, the small cry came again, thinner this time, almost swallowed by the old house and the rain tapping at the windows. Atlas pressed his nose to the bottom of the door and gave a low, urgent sound from deep in his chest. It was not fear. It was a command. Caleb turned, grabbed his phone from the kitchen counter, and dialed emergency services with one hand while searching the wall hook for the basement key with the other. His voice stayed low, but his pulse hammered. "This is Caleb Walker, off Route 322 outside Harrisburg. I have smoke coming from my basement, possible electrical fire, and something alive down there. I need fire and medical response." The dispatcher began asking questions, calm and steady, but Caleb's attention was already on Atlas. The dog had backed up a few feet, limping badly, eyes never leaving the door. "Stay," Caleb said out of habit. Atlas ignored him. The word hit the air and died there, useless. Caleb almost laughed, not because anything was funny, but because the broken dog he had owned for less than one night had just reminded him that loyalty was not obedience. Sometimes loyalty was disobedience with a holy purpose. He found the key behind an old calendar, slid it into the lock, and opened the basement door only a few inches. Smoke breathed out slowly, gray and bitter. The light switch clicked, but nothing happened. Caleb grabbed a flashlight from the drawer and swept the beam down the wooden steps. The basement looked like a throat leading into darkness. Old boxes lined the walls. His father's trunks sat beneath canvas tarps. A narrow orange flicker pulsed near the far corner where the electrical panel was mounted. Not a wall of flame. Not yet, but enough to turn minutes into seconds. "Atlas, no." Caleb reached down to block him, but the German shepherd slipped past with surprising speed, wounded leg tucked close, body low and certain. Caleb swore, under his breath, and followed. The steps groaned beneath his bare feet. Cold basement air met the smoke in strange layers. Damp earth below, scorched wood above, old metal, dust, and something else Caleb could not name. Atlas moved like he had done this before, nose to the ground, ears lifted, pausing every few feet to listen. Caleb kept the phone line open on the counter upstairs, the dispatcher's distant voice now faint behind him, calling his name. He should have turned back. He knew that. Every rule said wait outside. Every memory said do not leave a living thing behind. At the bottom of the stairs, Atlas stopped beside the largest trunk, the one Caleb had avoided since the funeral. It was dark green, stamped with his father's initials in fading white letters. T. W. Walker. The canvas tarp over it had fallen half to the floor. Atlas pawed at the boards behind it, scraping gently but insistently. The small cry came again from beyond that wall. Caleb's skin went cold. "There is no room back there," he whispered. But even as he said it, he remembered being 8 years old, watching his father carry lumber down here, hearing him talk about closing off an old coal storage space because it was unsafe. Caleb had forgotten. The house had not. Atlas scratched harder, then pressed his shoulder against a loose panel. Caleb knelt beside him, coughing once into his sleeve, and pulled at the edge of the board. It resisted, then gave with a tired crack, opening a gap wide enough for the flashlight beam to slip through. Inside was a narrow crawl space, no more than 3 feet high, choked with dust and old insulation. And at the far end, behind a collapsed cardboard box, 2 amber eyes reflected the light. Not human, not imagined. A puppy. A German shepherd puppy, small and shaking, crouched inside a plastic travel crate with a torn towel beneath him. Caleb stared, unable to make sense of it. He had brought home one dog. Only one. The crate had not been in his truck when he left the training facility. Or had it been hidden under the tarp and broken gear the owner had loaded into the bed without asking? Atlas gave a soft whine, the first gentle sound Caleb had heard from him. The puppy answered with a weak little cry. Caleb swallowed hard. "That yours, boy?" Atlas did not look away from the crate. That was answer enough. The smoke thickened above them. The orange flicker near the panel brightened and snapped once, sending sparks of light across the concrete like fireflies with no mercy. Caleb took one breath low to the floor and reached into the crawl space, but his arm was several feet short. Atlas lowered himself painfully, inch by inch, and began pushing into the narrow gap. "No, no, you cannot fit through there," Caleb whispered, but Atlas kept going. His bandaged leg dragged behind him, his body scraping dust from the boards, his focus fixed on the puppy at the far end. Caleb lay flat and reached for Atlas's hindquarters, ready to pull him back if the smoke dropped lower. Then his flashlight caught something beside his father's trunk, half buried under the fallen tarp. A folder, brown, water-stained, tied with a red cord. On the cover was a Marine Corps emblem and 3 words written in his father's careful block letters. K9 transfer records. Caleb froze. The past, the dog, the hidden puppy, the $1 sale. All of it seemed to tighten into a single thread. Atlas reached the crate and pressed his nose through the bars. The puppy stopped crying. For one breath, the basement became strangely quiet, as if even the house was listening. Then the smoke alarm upstairs began to scream. The alarm tore through the house with a sharp, relentless cry, but Atlas did not flinch. He stayed with his nose pressed against the crate, breathing through the narrow bars, keeping the puppy calm while Caleb forced his mind to move faster than fear. The smoke was still high, rolling along the ceiling beams in gray layers, but it was growing thicker by the second. Caleb pulled his shirt over his mouth and crawled closer to the opening. "Atlas, back," he said, steady but urgent. This time, the dog listened just enough to shift his body, making room. Caleb reached into the crawl space again, fingers stretching toward the crate handle. Too far. He grabbed an old fireplace poker leaning against the wall, slid it through the gap, and hooked the crate. Strapped with the careful patience of a man defusing memory itself. Inch by inch, the crate scraped across the dusty floor. The puppy whimpered, but Atlas stayed beside it, touching the bars with his muzzle as if telling the little one to hold on. Outside, sirens began to rise in the distance, faint at first, then clearer through the storm. Caleb pulled harder. The crate came free with a soft lurch, and he dragged it into the open basement just as a section of old insulation slipped from above and landed near the wall. Not large, not catastrophic, but enough to remind him that the house was no longer waiting. Caleb lifted the crate with both hands. The puppy inside was small, maybe 10 weeks old, sable and cream beneath the dust, with oversized paws and frightened amber eyes. A strip of faded tape on the side of the crate carried one word written in black marker: Mercy. Caleb stared at it for half a heartbeat. Mercy. Of all names. Of all nights. Atlas tried to stand, but his injured leg failed him. Caleb set the crate on the bottom step, turned back, and slid one arm beneath the German shepherd's chest. "I have got you," he whispered. Atlas was heavier than he looked, all bone, muscle, and stubborn courage. Caleb lifted him carefully, feeling the dog's heart pounding against his forearm. As they reached the stairs, the basement lights flickered once, then the darkness deepened. The flashlight rolled from Caleb's pocket and clattered down onto the concrete, sending its beam across the green trunk, the fallen tarp, and the brown folder marked with his father's handwriting. K9 transfer records. Caleb should have left it. Any firefighter would have told him that paper was not worth a breath of smoke. But the folder lay open now, pages scattered across the floor, and one photograph sat on top as if placed there by an unseen hand. A younger version of Atlas stood beside Caleb's father in front of a training yard, ears high, chest proud, eyes bright with purpose. Caleb stopped so suddenly Atlas gave a low sound of protest. His father had known this dog. Not maybe, not almost. The proof lay there in the flashlight's pale beam. Caleb's chest tightened until breathing hurt. More than the smoke. "Dad?" he whispered, but the word vanished beneath the screaming alarm. Another snap came from the electrical panel. Caleb moved. He carried Atlas up 2 steps, then 3, then set him down carefully on the landing long enough to reach back for the crate. Atlas leaned against the wall, refusing to collapse, eyes fixed on Mercy. Caleb lifted the puppy crate and pushed it ahead of him, then guided Atlas upward one painful step at a time. Every foot felt longer than a mile. The air near the kitchen was clearer, cold from the draft slipping under the back door. Caleb kicked the door open and stumbled onto the porch just as red lights washed across the rain-soaked yard. A fire engine rolled up the gravel drive, followed by an ambulance and 2 county sheriff vehicles. The world became wet grass, flashing lights, boots in mud, voices calling through the storm. Caleb set the crate under the porch overhang and lowered Atlas beside it. A firefighter in a yellow coat ran toward him. "Sir, is anyone else inside?" Caleb coughed into his sleeve and shook his head. "No people. Electrical fire in the basement. But there are records down there. Marine K9 records. My father's trunk." The firefighter looked toward the smoke pushing from the doorway. "We will handle the house. You need medical." Caleb almost argued, but Atlas made a soft sound, and everything else fell away. The German shepherd was lying on his side now, eyes half open, breath shallow but steady. Mercy pressed tiny paws against the inside of the crate, trying to reach him. Caleb dropped to his knees in the wet porch light. Rain blew across his shoulders. His hands trembled as he rested them gently against Atlas's neck. You did good, he said, voice breaking in a way he had not allowed for years. You hear me? You did good. Atlas blinked slowly. Then, with great effort, he opened his mouth and let something fall onto the porch boards. It was not the dog tag from Caleb's chest. It was older, tarnished, scratched at the edges. Caleb picked it up between two fingers and wiped away the soot with his thumb. The name stamped into the metal made the rain, the sirens, and the burning house fade into silence. Thomas Walker, his father's name. Beneath it was a second line Caleb had never seen before. Atlas, K9 unit. Caleb looked down at the wounded dog, then at the hidden puppy, then toward the basement door where firefighters were disappearing into smoke. The animal he had bought for $1 had not come into his life by accident. He had come carrying a message from a man Caleb thought was gone forever, and somewhere inside that old trunk was the truth about why Atlas had been discarded, why Mercy had been hidden, and why Caleb's father had never stopped trying to bring them home. The firefighters moved through the farmhouse with the quiet urgency of men who understood old buildings and bad wiring, their flashlights cutting through the smoke that rolled beneath the porch roof and drifted into the rain. Caleb stayed on his knees beside Atlas because standing felt impossible, not from weakness, from recognition. The tarnished tag in his palm seemed heavier than metal should ever be. Thomas Walker, Atlas, K9 unit. His father's name and the wounded dog's name pressed into the same small piece of steel, as if the past had waited years for Caleb to finally hold it. Mercy whimpered softly from inside the crate, her tiny paws tapping against the plastic door. Atlas heard her and lifted his head a fraction, then let it fall again with a tired sigh. Caleb reached toward the crate latch, but the paramedic beside him, a red-haired woman named Laura Bennett with calm brown eyes and a steady voice, touched his wrist. Let me check her first, she said. Caleb nodded, though every part of him wanted to pull the puppy into his arms and promise the world had run out of chances to hurt her. Laura opened the crate gently. Mercy blinked against the porch light, small and dusty, but alive. She was no bigger than a bundle of laundry, all ears and paws, with a pale sable coat and a streak of cream down her chest. The moment the door opened, she did not run. She crawled toward Atlas, pressing her nose against his shoulder as if she had known all along that he would come back for her. Atlas's tail moved once. Barely, but Caleb saw it. So did Laura. Her expression softened. That old boy held on for her, she murmured. Caleb looked at Atlas, at the bandage slipping from his leg, at the soot in his fur, at the eyes that still watched the puppy even while exhaustion pulled him under. He held on for more than that, Caleb said. Firefighters carried out the first blackened box 10 minutes later, then the green trunk. Then, wrapped inside a dry emergency tarp, the brown folder Caleb had seen on the basement floor. The fire captain, a broad man with silver hair named Ron Mercer, stepped onto the porch and handed it to Caleb. We found this under the trunk lid, he said. Most of it stayed dry. You said Marine records. Caleb took the folder with both hands. His fingers left faint streaks of rainwater across the cover. The red cord had burned at one end, but still held the pages together. He opened it carefully. The first page was a transfer form dated 7 years earlier. His father's signature sat near the bottom, firm and exact, the same handwriting Caleb remembered from birthday cards and grocery lists. The dog listed on the page was Atlas, male German Shepherd, 6 years old now. Former detection and recovery K9. Medical retirement requested. Handler recommendation, sanctuary placement, not resale. Caleb read the line twice. Not resale. His throat tightened. Beneath that was a handwritten note from Thomas Walker, folded into the record sleeve. Caleb recognized the slant of every letter before he read a single word. Son, if this ever reaches you, understand that not every mission ends when a uniform comes off. Some promises follow us home. Atlas served faithfully. He is not equipment. He is family. There are others like him, and if I cannot finish making that right, I pray someone better than me will. Caleb closed his eyes. Rain struck the porch roof above him in a steady rhythm, almost like 100 small fingers drumming out at him. He had spent years thinking his father left behind only silence, old trunks, and rooms full of things too painful to open. But here was a mission hidden under dust. Here was a promise his father had carried quietly, while Caleb was too lost inside his own grief to notice. Mr. Walker? Captain Mercer's. Voice brought him back. Caleb opened his eyes. The fire was nearly contained. Steam rose from the basement entrance. The farmhouse still stood, scarred but standing. There is something else, the captain said. He held up a small plastic evidence sleeve. Inside was a receipt from the K9 facility, recently dated, with Atlas listed as damaged property and Mercy listed only as surplus transport. Caleb's jaw set, but his voice stayed low. They knew she was in that crate. Captain Mercer did not answer right away. He looked toward the sheriff vehicles at the edge of the yard, then back at Caleb. You need to give that folder to Deputy Harris. Let the county start this properly. Caleb looked down at Atlas. The dog's eyes were open again, fixed on him, tired but clear. For a moment Caleb saw no smoke, no flashing lights, no wet porch boards. He saw his father kneeling beside a younger Atlas, one hand on the dog's shoulder, teaching a boy that loyalty was not loud. It was daily. It was costly. It stayed. Laura finished wrapping Mercy in a warm towel and placed her gently beside Atlas. The puppy curled against him at once. Atlas lowered his muzzle over her back with the faintest protective motion. Caleb slipped his father's old tag into his pocket, then pressed his hand to Atlas's head. All right, he whispered. We will finish it. At those words, Atlas exhaled slowly, as if he had been waiting all night not just to be rescued, but to deliver the mission to the right hands. And as the rain began to ease over the fields outside Harrisburg, Caleb Walker understood that the farmhouse had not caught fire to destroy what remained of his past. Somehow, by grace or timing or the strange mercy of a wounded dog, it had burned just enough to reveal what had been hidden. By dawn, the farmhouse smelled of wet ash, cold rain, and something strangely clean, like the world had been rinsed but not yet healed. The fire crews had gone, leaving yellow tape around the basement door and deep tire tracks in the gravel drive. Deputy Harris had taken copies of the folder, the receipt, and Caleb's statement, but Caleb kept the original note from his father folded inside his shirt pocket, close to the dog tags resting against his chest. He did not sleep. He sat in the passenger seat of Laura Bennett's emergency vehicle while she drove Atlas and Mercy to a 24-hour veterinary clinic on the edge of Harrisburg, a small brick building with a blue sign glowing through the gray morning. Atlas lay on a padded stretcher in the back, wrapped in a thermal blanket, his head turned toward Mercy's crate. Every few minutes, the puppy made a soft sound, and every time she did, Atlas's ears moved, even when his eyes stayed closed. Caleb watched that tiny movement like a prayer being answered 1 inch at a time. At the clinic, Dr. Samuel Price met them at the door. He was a white man in his early 50s, lean, careful, with silver at his temples and the calm hands of someone who had spent half his life convincing frightened animals that not every touch meant harm. He did not ask unnecessary questions. He saw the soot in Atlas's coat, the tired set of Caleb's shoulders, the puppy pressed against the crate door, and simply said, "Bring them in." The examination room was warm and smelled of antiseptic, clean towels, and coffee that had been sitting too long. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Caleb stood by the wall because he did not trust himself to sit. Dr. Price checked Mercy first. The puppy was weak, dehydrated, and frightened, but her heartbeat was strong. When he wrapped her in a fresh blanket and placed her in a small heated bed, she tried to crawl back toward Atlas. She has already chosen her family, the doctor said softly. Caleb looked through the glass partition where Atlas lay on the larger table, the old K9's chest rising and falling under the blanket. He chose her first, Caleb answered. Dr. Price moved to Atlas with the gentleness of a chaplain approaching a wounded soul. He cleaned the smoke from the dog's eyes, checked his injured leg, listened to his lungs, and frowned only once. Caleb noticed. Marines noticed everything. Say it plainly, Caleb said. Dr. Price removed the stethoscope from his ears. He inhaled smoke, but not as much as I feared. His leg was already in bad shape before tonight. Old damage. Poor treatment. But he is strong. Stronger than he looks. Caleb let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. Will he make it? The doctor looked at Atlas, then at Mercy, who had fallen asleep with one paw hanging over the edge of the blanket. If he gets rest, treatment, and someone stubborn enough to fight for him, yes. I believe he has a chance. Caleb nodded once, but something in his face gave way. Not dramatically, just a slight tremor at the mouth, a lowering of the eyes, the quiet collapse of a man who had held the night together with wire and will. He turned away, but Dr. Price pretended not to see. Mercy stirred then, giving a small whine from her bed. Atlas opened his eyes. Weak as he was, he lifted his head 2 inches and searched for her. Caleb stepped between them and placed one hand gently on Atlas's shoulder. "She is safe," he whispered. "You did it." Atlas looked at him for a long moment. There was no triumph in those amber eyes. No demand. Only a tired, ancient trust beginning to risk itself again. By mid-morning, Deputy Harris arrived at the clinic with a paper cup of coffee for Caleb and a face that said the night had not ended with sunrise. Harris was a broad, white man in his 40s with a shaved head, kind eyes, and the plain-spoken weight of rural law enforcement. He stood beside Caleb in the hallway outside the recovery room, speaking low so the animals would not startle. "The facility owner is claiming the puppy was not his," he said. "Says he never saw that crate before." Caleb looked through the glass at Mercy sleeping beside Atlas's blanket. "He loaded the gear into my truck himself." "I know." Harris tapped the folder under his arm. "And your father's records show complaints going back years. Dogs marked retired, then moved through private hands. Some paperwork missing. Some names changed. Your father was trying to trace them." Caleb closed his eyes. He could almost hear Thomas Walker's voice, quiet and firm, telling him to finish the work in front of him, not the guilt behind him. "Why did he not tell me?" Caleb asked. Harris did not answer quickly. "Maybe he tried. Maybe you were both carrying too much to hear each other." That landed. Softer than judgment and deeper than blame. Caleb swallowed and looked down at his hands. They were clean now, scrubbed raw in the clinic sink, but he still felt the dust from the basement boards under his nails. "What happens next?" Harris held up a small flash drive sealed in plastic. "Fire crew found this in the trunk too. Your father labeled it Sanctuary List. We are going to need help identifying the dogs and the people involved." Caleb looked back at Atlas. The old German shepherd was asleep now. Mercy curled close in a separate little bed just inches away, both of them breathing in the same slow rhythm. 2 wounded lives the world had nearly misplaced. Caleb felt the note in his pocket, the words pressing through fabric like a hand on his heart. "Some promises follow us home." Outside the clinic windows, the storm had passed. Sunlight broke over the wet parking lot, catching in the puddles until every dark place shone for a moment. Caleb took the flash drive from Harris. His voice, when it came, was quiet but steady. "Then we start with the list." In the recovery room, Atlas opened one eye, as if he had heard the mission being accepted. His tail moved once beneath the blanket, small and slow, but enough to make Mercy lift her head and answer with a sleepy little sound. Caleb smiled for the first time since the fire. It was not a happy smile yet. It was something better. A living one. The list opened on a borrowed laptop in the small consultation room behind Dr. Price's clinic, its screen glowing pale against the morning quiet. Caleb sat with Deputy Harris on one side and Dr. Price on the other, while beyond the glass wall Atlas slept under a blue blanket and Mercy dreamed in a heated bed no larger than a laundry basket. The flash drive held no dramatic confession, no single line that made everything simple. It held something sadder. Names, dates, transfer numbers. Dogs moved from military-adjacent programs into private facilities. Retired K-9s marked for sanctuary placement, then redirected through quiet paperwork to places that did not exist on any map Caleb trusted. His father had organized it all with a patience that felt almost holy. Each file had a note. Each note had a question. Where did this dog go? Who signed this release? Why was the medical record changed? Caleb scrolled slowly, feeling the hours of his father's life hidden inside every line. Thomas Walker had not been careless in his final years. He had been careful enough to leave a trail for someone with the courage to follow it. Caleb stopped when he saw Atlas's file. There was the old photograph again, his father kneeling beside a younger Atlas on a sunny training field, one hand resting on the dog's chest. Below it was a note written 6 months before Thomas Walker died. Atlas shows strong attachment memory and protective response. Recommend placement with handler family, if available. Handler family. Caleb read the words once, then again. His father had meant him. The room seemed to tilt gently, not from shock, but from the strange ache of being loved too late to answer. Dr. Price removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Your father knew this dog needed someone familiar, he said. Caleb looked through the glass. Atlas's ear twitched in his sleep, and Mercy, sensing even that small movement, pressed closer to the edge of her bed. He knew I needed him too, Caleb said. Deputy Harris leaned forward, pointing at another file. This is the facility owner, Marvin Cole. He bought several dogs through a shell rescue last year. Your father flagged him twice. Caleb remembered Cole clearly. The man at the counter. The false smile. The way he had called Atlas damaged property while sliding the dollar bill into a metal cash box. No rage rose in Caleb. Not the hot kind. What came instead was colder, steadier, more useful. Can you act on this? He asked. Harris nodded. With the records, the receipt, the puppy, and the fire report, we can get a warrant. But I need you to understand something. This may be bigger than one man. Caleb looked back at the screen, at the list of names stretching downward like a roll call no one had honored. Then we do it right. By noon, 2 sheriff vehicles and an animal welfare van pulled out toward the old K9 facility, 20 miles west along a two-lane road bordered by wet fields and bare trees. Caleb rode with Harris, though the deputy had told him he did not have to come. He came anyway, not to confront anyone, not to prove anything. He came because some missions did not require a weapon or a uniform. They required witness. The sky had cleared, leaving the Pennsylvania countryside washed in silver light. Fence posts glittered with rain. Farmhouses sat far back from the road, their windows bright against the cold. Caleb held his father's tag in his closed fist and said nothing for most of the drive. When they reached the facility, the place looked smaller than it had the day before, less like a business than a tired lie. The cracked sign by the driveway swung in the wind. The kennel run stood behind the main building, gray and damp, the chain links trembling softly. Marvin Cole came out before anyone reached the door. He was a pale, narrow man in his late 50s, wearing a brown canvas jacket and an expression of practiced inconvenience. I already told your deputy everything, he said, eyes sliding to Caleb and then away. Harris held up the warrant. Now you can tell it with records present. Cole's face changed only slightly, but Caleb saw it. A small tightening around the mouth. A man hearing footsteps behind a locked door. The search was quiet, methodical. No shouting, no spectacle. Officers checked files. Animal welfare workers examined kennels. In a back storage room that smelled of damp cardboard and old feed, they found crates stacked beneath tarps, empty but recently used. In a cabinet behind the office, they found tags, medical slips, and transfer forms that matched names on Thomas Walker's list. Caleb stood at the doorway, not entering, watching the pieces come together with a grief too deep for noise. Then from the last kennel on the left came a soft sound. A single whine. The animal welfare officer, a black woman named Denise Carter with kind eyes and a firm voice, raised her hand for everyone to slow down. Inside the kennel was an older German shepherd, white around the muzzle, lying on a rubber mat with a red collar but no tag. He lifted his head when Caleb stepped closer. Not afraid, just tired. Caleb checked the list on Harris's clipboard. The name beside the description was Valor. Missing sanctuary transfer. Caleb crouched outside the kennel door, keeping his hands visible. Hey, Valor, he said softly. The dog's ears rose at the sound of his name. Denise looked at Caleb, then at Harris. We have another one. For the first time that day, Harris let out a breath that sounded almost like relief. Caleb closed his eyes for 1 second, and in the darkness behind them, he saw Atlas limping through smoke, Mercy waiting in the crate, his father writing names by lamplight, refusing to let forgotten souls disappear. When Caleb opened his eyes, Valor had moved closer to the kennel gate. The old dog pressed his nose gently through the chain link. Caleb touched 2 fingers to it. Warm, alive, waiting. And Caleb understood that the night before had not been the end of the rescue. It had only been the first door opening. Valor came out of the kennel as if he had forgotten the world could open. Denise Carter clipped a soft lead to his collar and waited, giving him the dignity of choosing the first step. The old German shepherd stood still for several seconds, his gray muzzle lifted, his nose testing the cold Pennsylvania air that slipped through the open door at the end of the kennel row. Then he walked forward, slow but steady, and Caleb felt something inside him bow its head. There was no cheering, no sudden music, only the sound of paws on damp concrete, the rustle of paperwork in Deputy Harris's hands, and the low wind moving across the empty training yard where too many promises had been misplaced. Marvin Cole sat in the office now, watched by another deputy, his voice reduced to clipped answers and careful denials. Caleb did not look at him. He kept his eyes on the dogs. One by one, the animal welfare team checked the remaining kennels. Some were empty. Some held blankets, bowls, old training leads, and the stale silence of lives moved through too quickly. But 3 more dogs were found in the rear building, all German shepherds, all older, all listed somewhere in Thomas Walker's sanctuary records. Their names were Ranger, Hope, and Major. When Denise read the names aloud, each dog reacted in a small way. A lifted ear, a blink, a soft breath, as if their names had been keys slid back into locks. Caleb stood near the doorway with his father's tag in his palm, watching strangers become witnesses. "Your father was thorough," Harris said quietly beside him. Caleb nodded. He was always better at keeping records than talking. Harris gave a faint, sympathetic smile. Maybe this was how he talked. The words stayed with Caleb. They followed him as the dogs were led into warm vans with clean blankets and water bowls. They followed him as evidence boxes were carried from the office. They followed him when Denise handed Caleb a small leather collar from the storage cabinet, its brass plate scratched but readable. Atlas. Caleb ran his thumb over the name. This collar was not the one Atlas had worn at the sale. That one had been too tight, cheap nylon, meant for convenience, not care. This one was old, softened by use, the kind a handler would keep oiled and fitted with 2 fingers of room. On the inside of the leather, someone had written in faded marker, "Bring him home." Caleb knew the handwriting before his mind accepted it. His father again. The yard blurred for a second, not from tears exactly, but from the sudden nearness of a man he had spent years holding at a distance. Thomas Walker had not left a speech. He had left a trail of mercy. By late afternoon, the rescued dogs arrived at Dr. Price's clinic and a nearby shelter partner, where volunteers moved with quiet purpose through warm rooms that smelled of towels, broth, and disinfectant. Caleb returned to the recovery wing with the collar tucked inside his jacket. Atlas was awake. Not strong, not fully, but awake. Mercy was curled against a stuffed fleece toy beside him, her little belly rising and falling in peace. When Caleb stepped through the door, Atlas lifted his head, and for the first time since they had met, the old K9's tail thumped twice against the blanket. The sound was soft, barely anything. To Caleb, it felt like church bells. "Hey, partner," Caleb whispered. The word came out before he could stop it. "Partner." Atlas watched him approach with tired amber eyes. Caleb sat on the floor beside the recovery bed rather than standing over him. He held out the leather collar, letting Atlas smell it first. The dog's nostrils moved. Then something changed. His ears eased back, not in fear, but in recognition. He pressed his muzzle against the collar and closed his eyes. Caleb's breath caught. "He kept it," he said. Dr. Price stood in the doorway, arms folded gently. "Who did?" Caleb swallowed. "My father." For a long moment, no one spoke. Mercy woke, stretched her oversized paws, and wobbled toward Caleb with the bold innocence of a creature who had decided the world was safe because one brave dog told her so. She climbed onto his boot and sat there as if claiming him. Caleb looked down at her and laughed once, a broken little sound that surprised him. Atlas opened one eye, watching. Caleb picked Mercy up carefully and settled her beside Atlas again. "Do not worry," he told him. "I'm not taking her anywhere." Atlas relaxed, and that trust, small as it was, undid Caleb more than the fire had. That evening, Deputy Harris returned with news. The records from the facility matched enough names to widen the investigation. Other counties were being contacted. Retired handlers were being called. Sanctuary placements were being verified. The truth was no longer buried in a basement trunk or hidden behind a dollar sign. It was moving now, from hand to hand, voice to voice, gaining light. Caleb listened from the clinic hallway, his eyes fixed on Atlas through the glass. "You understand what this means?" Harris asked. Caleb nodded slowly. "It means my father was not chasing ghosts." Harris looked toward the recovery room. No, he was following dogs home. Night settled over Harrisburg with a clean coldness after the storm. The clinic lights glowed against the dark windows. Volunteers whispered in the halls. Somewhere down the corridor, Valor gave one soft bark in his sleep, and another rescued dog answered with a sigh. Caleb stayed beside Atlas until the old K9 drifted off again, Mercy tucked beneath his chin. He rested his hand near Atlas's paw, not touching, just close enough to be chosen. After a while, Atlas shifted in his sleep and placed his paw over Caleb's fingers. Caleb did not move. The old pain in his chest, the one he had carried since leaving the Marines, did not vanish. Miracles did not always erase wounds. Sometimes they simply gave them somewhere holy to rest. And in that quiet room, with rainwater still drying on his boots and his father's mission finally breathing again, Caleb understood that rescue was not a single act. It was a promise repeated until every forgotten soul heard its name. The next morning arrived without drama, which made it feel almost unreal. Sunlight entered the clinic in pale gold strips, laying itself across the tile floors, the metal cages, and the quiet faces of dogs who had spent too long waiting for a gentle day. Caleb had slept for less than 2 hours in a vinyl chair beside Atlas, his jacket folded behind his neck and his boots still marked with mud from the facility yard. When he woke, his first instinct was to look for smoke. His second was to look for the dog. Atlas was watching him. The old German shepherd lay on his side beneath the blue blanket, his amber eyes open, clear, and strangely calm. Mercy was tucked against the edge of his bed, not touching his injured leg, as if even in sleep she had learned tenderness. Caleb sat up slowly. "Morning," he whispered. Atlas blinked once. Mercy answered with a tiny yawn that seemed too large for her face. For the first time in years, Caleb woke and did not feel alone in the room. Dr. Price entered a few minutes later carrying a clipboard and 2 cups of coffee, one of which he handed to Caleb without asking. "He had a stable night," the doctor said. "Breathing is better. Leg is still a concern, but not beyond hope." Caleb looked at Atlas. Hope. The word had been used so often in churches, hospitals, and military ceremonies that it had almost lost shape for him. But here it was again, lying under a blanket, breathing through an old scar, refusing to be decorative. "What does he need?" Caleb asked. Dr. Price set the clipboard down. "Time. Medication. Careful rehabilitation. A quiet place. Someone patient." Caleb gave a faint smile. "That last part might be a problem." Dr. Price smiled back. "For him or for you?" Caleb looked down as Mercy wobbled toward his boot and chewed harmlessly on the lace. "Probably both." By noon, Deputy Harris returned with Denise Carter and a county animal welfare supervisor. They stood together in the consultation room while Caleb signed temporary custody papers for Atlas and Mercy. The word temporary bothered him, but Harris explained the process gently. Because they were part of an active investigation, the county had to document everything properly. Caleb understood. Properly mattered. Properly was how his father had kept faith when no one was watching. Denise set a folder on the table. "Valor, Ranger, Hope, and Major are safe at the partner shelter," she said. "They are older, but they are eating. Slowly. That is a good sign." Caleb nodded. "Can I see them later?" "They would like that," Denise said. Then she paused, choosing her next words with care. "There may be more. The list your father kept includes dogs in 3 states. Some are probably already placed with families. Some may not be." Caleb stared at the tabletop, at the forms under his hand, at the ink drying beside his name. Caleb Walker. Responsible party. The phrase looked heavier than a signature should. "Then we find out," he said. Harris studied him quietly. "You do not have to carry the whole thing yourself." Caleb looked through the glass. Atlas had fallen asleep again, but one paw rested near Mercy's blanket, close enough to guard her without holding her down. "I think that is what I got wrong before," Caleb said. "I thought carrying something meant doing it alone." No one answered, because some truths arrive better without applause. That afternoon, Caleb drove back to the farmhouse for the first time since the fire. Harris followed him out, partly for documentation, partly because he knew a man should not always walk back into a damaged home by himself. The house stood under a clear sky, windows open to release the last of the smoke, porch boards dark where rain had soaked them through. The damage was mostly in the basement. The kitchen still stood. The hallway still held photographs. The bedroom still held the folded flag and his father's picture. Everything smelled faintly, of ash, but not ruin. Caleb moved through the room slowly, touching nothing at first. On the kitchen floor, the wool blanket where Atlas had lain was still there, marked with dust and a few strands of sable fur. Caleb picked it up and held it against his chest. He did not mean to. He just did. Harris waited near the doorway, silent. Downstairs, the basement looked different in daylight. Firefighters had cut away part of the wall, exposing the old coal storage space where Mercy had been hidden. The crawl space was empty now. The green trunk sat near the stairs, scorched along one edge, but intact. Caleb knelt before it and lifted the lid. Inside were old training leads, photographs, notebooks, medical records, and a folded Marine jacket that still carried the faint scent of cedar and thyme. On top of the jacket lay an envelope Caleb had not seen before. His name was written across it. Caleb. His father's handwriting. His real name. Not son. Not buddy. Not any of the quiet substitutes men use when love is too large for their mouths. Caleb opened it carefully. The letter inside was short. I never knew how to tell you that saving others does not mean you failed the ones you lost. I hope one day you believe that. Atlas helped me after your mother passed. If he finds his way to you, do not send him away. He knows how to sit with grief. Caleb read the words once. Then again. The basement blurred at the edges. For years he had thought his father never understood the guilt Caleb carried home from service. The names he did not say. The nights he sat awake with every light off because darkness felt more honest. But Thomas Walker had understood. He had simply spoken in the language he knew best. Records, rescued dogs, a collar kept safe, a mission left open for his son to finish. Caleb folded the letter and placed it inside his jacket, beside the first note. When he stood, the house did not feel healed. Not yet, but it no longer felt empty. That evening, he returned to the clinic with the wool blanket washed and warm from a laundromat dryer. He placed it beside Atlas's recovery bed. The old K9 sniffed it, then rested his head on it with a sigh so deep it seemed to leave years behind. Mercy climbed onto the blanket and promptly fell asleep between Atlas's front paws. Caleb sat beside them, his father's letters in his pocket, the temporary custody papers on the chair, and the first clear understanding of what the farmhouse could become taking shape inside him. Not a museum of grief. Not a place to store what hurt. A sanctuary. A home for dogs who had served, suffered, waited, and still had love left to give. Atlas opened his eyes and looked at him, as if he had been waiting for Caleb to arrive at that thought. Caleb reached out and gently touched the old leather collar on the table. All right, he whispered. When you are ready, we go home. And this time, we bring others with us. Atlas's tail moved once beneath the blanket. Mercy slept through it. Outside, the last light faded over Harrisburg, soft and amber, and for the first time, Caleb did not fear the night coming.